Hi, I'm Susan. Welcome to my home and studio at Windy Acre Cottage. It's a 100-year-old craftsman cottage where I love to paint and garden and entertain and care for all my wonderful fur babies, both those that are adopted and all the little fosters. It's also my home base for many fun adventures of the art, history, and gardening kind.
Okay, so this month we are migrating into orange. Now, I do have two reference photos we were going to finish up this month with, and we will still use those. But we're dialing it back down in terms of our composition so that we can relearn how to take a simple composition and paint it, and we will build on that to the point that when we get a more complicated composition, we'll better understand how to break it down into 4 or less shapes. Okay, so how do you mix orange?
Red and yellow.
Green and yellow?
Red and yellow.
Okay, I'm sorry, I heard green and yellow.
We could try it.
That sounds like a gorgeous color. I'm not sure it would be orange, but orange is red and yellow. And you guys know that I like to paint from primary colors plus black and white. But I have not found the magic composition of primary colors. You should be able to take a red and a yellow and mix it and have the perfect orange. But it seems like every red has a little bit of blue in it. So when you mix it with yellow, what do you get?
Pink. I made that up.
Kind of a brown orange. Who wants a brown orange? You know, or you mix blue and red together, and the red has a little yellow in it, and what happens? You get a brown purple. And nobody wants that. So I always have available to me, if I need it, a beautiful orange tube of paint, so that if I cannot mix it the way that I want it, then at least I can do that. Now, I will say with oil paints, it's easier to mix the colors to look more vibrant. I don't know why I haven't been able to find that magic combination with the acrylic paints yet. So I did add a little bit of orange to my plate today, to my palette. So if we're going to start with the background, well, let's talk about the color first, orange. Doing my research, I learned that the word orange for this color didn't exist until the 1600s. It was just referred to as yellowish red, which got me thinking, how many other colors don't have its own unique name? But as women, I think we tend to make up color names because we don't want to say it's kind of a grayish purple blue. We want to go, maybe it's periwinkle. It's periwinkle, it's Wedgwood. You know, we come up with these wonderful, wonderful names, but those aren't really the official names of those colors. So it actually, the fruit came first and was named orange, and then eventually they started calling the color itself orange as well. So we have orange, we know how to mix it. What is the complement or the opposite of orange on the color wheel?
Green. Blue.
Blue. Because if orange is made out of red and yellow, what's the other color that's not represented of the primaries? Blue. So blue is its complement. So what we're going to do is we could even mix some blue with our orange to come up with this beautiful shadow color right here. And I noticed that some of you have bought some amazingly beautiful shades of blue. You can even tuck those into the shadows and it'll look really good. It won't look like a photograph, it'll look like a fabulous painting. So I'm actually going to start with the background and come forward as I always do. So I'm going to mix up a very dark, let me put black on my palette. I'm going to mix up a really dark blue using black and blue, maybe just a smidge of red, to put in this dark color here. Because if blue is the complement to orange, I think it's going to look really good to have some of that in here. Straight blue. Blue, black, and just a little bit of red. Very
We definitely do. Where are you? Oh, over there.
Yeah. Now something Shannon does that I always forget to do, even though it's on my list to do, is to move color around. So when you mix up this palette, when you mix up this color, you might want to think of this as your dark color, and where else would there be dark color on your painting? Alrighty. So if we're starting with the background and coming forward, I'm going to use pretty much a red with a little yellow in it, maybe a tiny bit of white, but not too much. I don't want it to go cool on me for this background, and this may be a little too chromatic.
Come on.
Yeah, that little critter right there.
Gosh, I went to pick those flowers today that I'm gonna use in my thing. There's a spider this big.
Oh, a big garden spider.
Yellow.
Oh, they're so pretty.
Oh, it scared me to death. It could have been in my hair.
I don't think she thinks they're pretty.
I'm going back to take a picture because it really was,
This is for the
a work of
door.
art.
Yeah, they're
Not good enough.
we used to call them banana spiders.
They come in on
They have like different.
Names, yeah. I guess it's whatever your grandparents.
Well, you don't want a wolf spider.
They're ugly, but they're not dangerous.
I don't like any spider.
You smash them and 200 babies come out.
Oh, oh, that's gross. But I don't smash them. I don't kill anything.
Well, I do, smash them.
Sandy, Peoria, he was the one that, the zipper, they make a zipper, it looks like a zigzag zipper web, you know?
Yeah,
On
yeah.
Sandy's porch on the Buttercup House.
Oh,
And,
my.
so they've had a lot of flies, and so they got one of those fly traps with water in them and everything. And we put it down under the web, and
You fall in.
we named her Charlotte.
Oh.
She had her web across the corner of the porch,
Yeah.
the front porch, and, so we put the fly trap over by her web, and all the flies were flying. That spider was this big. I mean, she had all these.
You made your own fly
Spiders,
swatter.
yeah, she was just busy and racking those flies up and everything, and then, the next time we went, she was about that big.
With 100 flies in
And
it.
then she disappeared, so I imagine she either
You
exploded.
ate yourself to
She
death.
died of a coronary, yeah.
Yeah, she just exploded or.
Big Mac heart attack.
Well, I saw online where somebody saved a hummingbird out of a spider's nest.
Yeah.
I didn't think they could get caught in there.
They're so tiny,
Oh, my.
So you may have noticed that it gets darker on the wall behind the pumpkin the closer you come over to the left. So I just mixed up some of that dark color in with my red to get it darker. And it even appears to me that it's
Well, it's covering up my lines.
and that's where I started from the left.
It covered all my lines that were light. Now they are not light.
well, and the grooves between the boards actually get much lighter. So if you look over here on the right side,
Yes.
you've got a red board with a dark shape between it, but then
Yes.
once you come over here toward the left, your boards are much darker, but your lines in between are lighter.
Well, I'll have to go over the dark line with something light then.
Possibly.
I will too.
Gotta try.
This morning I wanted to paint my pumpkin reference photo all over again. So I've set out my palette using the primaries plus a little phthalo turquoise and two orange shades that I don't normally use. They're from Hobby Lobby, Master's Touch, the thick body acrylics. One of them's in red light and the other one's in orange. Now you may notice that I'm reusing a canvas panel that I had painted on before. So I'm going to go ahead and try to paint over it in really a cool color this time. It's got a blue tint to it to be the complement to the orange pumpkin that's going to be underneath. But I did want to cover that board so that I could draw in my basic shape and not see the painting that's underneath. You may even recognize that painting underneath as one of the ones that I painted doing the test or the experiment with different underpaintings. So now I'm just blocking in my basic shape, starting with the pumpkin, the table, the dark space that's on the left side, the cast shadow, and just a little detail in that barn wall behind the pumpkin. I turned on the light so you could see it better. I'm afraid the glare made it worse, but there's the basic shape. Make sure that stem shows up. So now we're laying in our basic color, or scrubbing in our basic color, and I'm starting with that dark shape first. And it's a dark bluish purple. So I went with my blue, and I used the phthalo turquoise this time, plus a little red, plus black to get it that dark. And because I have several other dark values that pop up in the painting, I'm just going to go ahead and use that same color to represent those darks. Now, I know myself, I'm going to paint over this several times. I never just paint once and leave it alone. I'm always coming back and messing with it. So this is kind of the first layer of dark that I'm putting under there. And you may notice that the video skips a little bit. Anytime I go away from the camera to mix paint, I typically cut that portion out just to save time. So we are scrubbing in the basic red. And I didn't do too much to it because that underpainting is dark and cool. And acrylics dried darker. I just went ahead and put that on there. I think it's just straight from the tube. Now this painting is smaller than the one I did in class on Thursday. This one's 9 by 12. And the one in class is 12 by 16. So this won't take me nearly as long, being smaller. But I noticed that I choked up a lot on the brush itself because it's a smaller brush, it's a smaller canvas, and not as much room to be loose. Now, I mentioned I had two different oranges. One is orange and one is a red light. Anywhere that it's lighter, like where the light is hitting the pumpkin, I'm using that orange. And then in the shadows, I'm using the red light. Now I will come back with a brownish color too as well. But I wanted to distinguish where the light's hitting and where it's not. Now, one thing that is a little confusing with this reference photo is I really want a reference photo that has one light source. I want the light coming from one direction, casting a shadow in the opposite direction. Well, once I got into painting this, I could tell there's more than one light source. So if the light is truly coming from the left side of our reference photo, then the cast shadow would be going to the right side. And it's not. It's kind of going at a 5 o'clock angle, which means the dominant light source is on the opposite side of that pumpkin. And if it was on the opposite side, we wouldn't have as many highlights as we do. So somehow there are two different light sources hitting that pumpkin. And I found that a wee bit confusing as I was painting. I'm afraid the viewer's going to think it looks a wee bit confusing as well. Throwing in the shadow side of the stem. And that pumpkin, of course, as pumpkins are, they're kind of divided into wedges or segments. And the light cannot hit the pumpkin evenly everywhere. Wherever the pumpkin comes out into the light, it's going to be lighter and warmer. And then as that little segment or divot goes back into the pumpkin, it's going to be darker and cooler. You can see where I'm holding my brush like it's a pencil or a pen right now. I hate it when I do that, but when I'm doing these little bitty turns, I have to have a little bit more control. And that's really what I didn't like about the painting I did on Thursday. It had too much control to it. The edges were too sharp. In fact, after I finished this painting today, it's like, this is still not what I was going for. I want to go back and do it again. Now, as that pumpkin turns into the shadow, that's where your most chromatic color is going to be, or that halftone. Out there, see there where it's out in the light, it's going to be a lot lighter, but it's not nearly as chromatic as that orange once it goes around toward the shadow. And I'm trying to put in some highlights here, but my paint is too wet. And for time's sake, I should have let it dry, but I didn't. I wanted to get this video completed and to you as soon as possible. So I just used a very light pressure to paint on top. Though I fear I was pulling off more paint than actually applying paint at that point. And that happens sometimes. Trying to lay in a little detail on the stem, the highlight on the stem. Now that is not pure white. It looks white from here, but it's kind of an orangey brown. Very light, obviously, orangey brown. In fact, it may be a little too white, but it won't be by the time we're done. I love that red light color. I keep going and trying to work that in more just because I think it's so pretty. And do you see how the red in the barn behind the pumpkin has gotten darker now that it's dried? That can be very frustrating as an artist to think you've got the perfect color, and it is when you lay it on the canvas, but then as it dries it darkens and that value shifts. Again, I'm going to try to lay in those highlights. Ooh, I love that. I wish I just stopped right there, but of course I didn't. And I think that's really interesting about painting is that we all know how to start a painting. We don't know how to finish a painting. It's always like, I can do more, I can do more. As if the more you paint, the better it's going to be. And that's not always the case. I did know or saw on one of the social media platforms where Ann Blair Brown had completed a painting in 40 brushstrokes. And that seems like a great exercise for all of us to try to do. No one says you have to display the painting when you're done. No one says you have to leave it there. But I may try that next time just to see if it turns out better. And if you do that exercise, the brush stroke is, what counts as one brush stroke is laying the brush on the canvas. And you can do as much as you want to do, but once you bring that brush off the canvas, then that counted as the first brush stroke. So if you've got enough paint on your brush, you could scrub in the background in 1 or 2 strokes. Trying to lay in a little more detail on that stem. Trying to get a little reflected light bounced back up. Working on the occlusion shadow under there so it doesn't look like it's floating. You want to anchor that object to the object it's sitting on. And that's usually your darkest dark in the whole painting is right there. If you look at that reference photo, there are some really bright highlights on there. And I'm having a hard time getting those in and making them look natural. This is a smaller brush than what I was using before. I don't know if you can tell, but I've switched brushes to a really small brush. And that's another thing. If you don't like sharp edges and detail, don't use a small brush. And I don't. I really like things much looser. But I'm trying to get those highlights in there. And I don't want to mess up the beautiful orange that's underneath. So going to brighten up that barn wall a little bit. Not everywhere, just in places. And this time I added a little yellow and a little white just to try to brighten it up just a little bit. And I don't mind painting over the same area more than once. I actually like the effect that it makes. I like several colors showing up. If you come to my Creative Spirits class, we refer to that as gradation. Light can't hit an object evenly all over that object. It's going to be brighter and darker in some areas. I'm actually lightening up that dark space in the back. I like having the dark back there because I like having the contrast with all the color and the light, but I think I got it too dark. So I'm just going to add kind of an orangey brown on top with a little bit of a blue to cool it off. I love to sneak blue in an orange painting. Soften that edge, use a finger. Okay. A little more detail. Soften it. I have no trouble sticking my finger on a painting trying to soften an edge. There are tools you can use to do that. In fact, just a clean dry brush will do the same thing. Okay, I'm overworking the painting now. Can you see it's looking more like a tomato? It's looking more like a tomato. I'm overworking it. Very easy to do. Very easy to just keep on going. I love to tell my students that I liken it to baseball. You know, a good batting average for a baseball player is 300. Batting 300. That means for every 10 times they get up to bat, they make it to first base 3 times. For some reason, as artists, when we step up to the easel, we think we got to knock it out of the park every single time, and that is just impossible. And quite frankly, I feel like I need to, because I do want to paint looser, I feel like I need to paint every day and really, really try on keeping it soft, keeping it loose, not overworking the painting, and just practice until it's where I want it to be. And I do paint often, that is the truth, but I don't always paint acrylics. Sometimes it's oil, sometimes it's watercolor. Every medium has its own techniques, and by far I do more acrylic than anything else just because it cleans up so much easier. But I am seriously tempted to paint this a third time and just do the 40 stroke rule, or even 50, or even 75. Just give myself a limit and let's see what happens. I don't know if you've noticed this, but the front of the table does not match the back of the table now. The front of the table grew, and I didn't even notice that until it was finished. So I had to pull paints out of the trash and continue working on that table to get it lined up off camera. And I did go ahead and add a little orange into that table color because color bounces around, and if that pumpkin is truly that chromatic, it's going, and that light is that strong, it's going to throw some of that orange color onto the table underneath it. And there we go. That's the second one.